The Center for Human Rights and Legal Pluralism is a focal point for innovative legal and interdisciplinary research, dialogue, and outreach. The center's mission is to provide students, professors, and the wider community with a locus of intellectual and physical resources for engaging critically with how law impacts upon some of the compelling social problems of our modern era. The center is pleased to welcome you to a talk by Dr. Suraj Yende entitled Caste Matters. The caste system in India is powered by specific forms of subjugation and exclusion. As a student of constitutional law, I'm particularly interested in understanding the transformative power of constitutions and the potential of subaltern constitutionalism. The architect of India's constitution, Dr. Ambedkar, had a broad, sweeping, grand view of the revolutionary power of India's constitution. But much of Ambedkar's vision lies shattered today, with the majoritarian Hindu right wing populist government in power, determined to erase minority rights, premised on Hindu elitism, casteism, anti Dalit, anti women, anti religious minorities. The list goes on and on. It is time to reclaim the nation. And so I'm delighted to welcome to this virtual space my friend Dr. Suraj Yende to speak to us on these issues. Dr. Yende is currently a senior fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School. He holds a research associate position with the Department of African and African American Studies, a fellowship at the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research, and he is a member of the founding team of the Initiative for Institutional Anti-Racism and Accountability at Harvard University. Dr. Yangde holds a PhD from the University of the Witwatersrand, South Africa. He's an international human rights attorney by qualification from India and the UK. Dr. Yangde is one of India's leading scholars and public intellectual. He is the author of the best selling book Caste Matters and co editor of an award winning anthology, The Radical in Ambedkar. He has published in the field of caste, race, ethnicity studies, and interregional labor migration in the global south. Currently, he is involved in developing a critical theory of Dalit and Black studies. His recent work with philosopher Cornel West has received global attention and calls for unity between African Americans and Dalits. Before I hand the virtual floor over to him, a brief word about the format. Dr. Yangdi will speak for about 20 minutes, following which we'll have about 20 minutes or so for question and answers, which I'm hoping and I'm sure will be a respectful academic intellectual exchange. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Suraj Yende and thank you all for coming. Thank you, Suraj.
Thank you so much, Vrinda. I am so delighted to be here, and I can hear the virtual applauses from everybody. You just made it. Also, the introduction is so smooth. Didn't feel like it was the bureaucratic order. It really felt coming from a place of genuine respect and mutuality. So I also greatly honor you for the work, and it's been almost like 3 years, if my math is correct, that we've been thinking about doing something, and I'm happy at least virtually we have gotten a chance. The French part of Canada has always been of interest just because of its political history and how it kind of manifests. So maybe in future uh, we'll be able to see each other in person, meet all of you in person, and share the love and affection that we have all for each others. I would like to also thank Sharon for her very kind liaison and also making sure we are doing this on board. In advance, thanks to Priya and as well as Justin for their contribution in making this event whatever it is today. And I can see a very excellent scholar and an upcoming bright student, Shikha Divakar, who is also at McGill, a Dalit woman scholar herself, probably the first Dalit ever to be graduating from McGill. So McGill has that honor. So I'm excited to see you all and all the friends and comrades in the struggle. Uh, Thank you again. The issue of caste obviously got a much highlight last year, or let me say 4 months ago when Isabel Wilkerson came out with her another hit. The book was titled Caste and Origin and Discontent. And the book literally framed caste in an American setting, but also kind of draw analogies to the some might say the original form of casteism in India, but also how the field of Nazi ground in Germany worked out in the 20th century. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to pay attention to some aspect, if not all aspect, to India's situation, because really the fears that people talk about or envisaged are actually in practice in India as we speak now. Much of the political theory, history, as well as the legal definitions of how to misgovern or how to face a fascistic state that is extremely wedded with capitalism, which denounces the rights of poor working class people, people working as farmers, people who are part of a mass, into a caricature of a negativized trope that very much fits into the conglomeration of what we have, a Hindu Rashtra, the Hindu country, Hindu nation proposed by the obviously ruling party and its parent RSS, Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. And it is in this light we need to understand how caste features in these macro definitions and how it conveniently escapes our privileged notions of looking at some of the totalitarian theories, to borrow obviously Anna Ardent's placement of how the totalitarian ethic as well as practice meet together to produce another form of a system that doesn't guarantee rights but definitely guarantees oppression. And I think it is in this light, when we visit the concept of today's India, what we see is it's a Brahminic nationalist frame. The genius of ruling class in India, which is currently in the power as well as in opposition, have managed to obscure the ideal definitions and recognitions that needed to be deployed, and instead provided a discourse which was very much confined within a theological, religious-centric nationhood. And that really granted a more majoritarian view and perspective and support to a larger constituency. In this case, what we see is India has recorded approximately 6,500 castes. And if you go with subcaste, you are counting into 20,000 approximate subcaste. That this complex, extremely diverse, with its own unique history, patterns of civilization, patterns of teaching, learning, and developing new spirituality, and as well as the philosophical enterprise, has now clubbed into what we have the Indian Federation or Union of India, more aptly put in its constitutional definition. Now, to look at this huge country that is obviously extremely diverse in its physical geospace, but also in its cultural as well as religious background. 6,500 castes recognized across India continue to contest over power almost in every sphere. If you just consider the macro four arrangements of the government, media, executive, judiciary, as well as a legislature, what we see is this huge, complex, as well as divided nation aims for a unity of a certain phantasmic reality. And that is only made possible due to, and I think I have said this elsewhere as well, that with this, the nation that we have, what we call India, the best it has in it, with all its defaults and faults, is India's constitution. With its own limitations notwithstanding, it has managed to produce a dossier, a guidance a cookbook for majority as well as minority protections. And within this, the Constitution of India has a very unique lifespan. It has its very different history because starting from obviously Government of India 1919 Act, which could be considered one of the first attempts to describe and promulgate certain laws for the Indian citizens to govern, was created during the British era. The 1935 had its own version, and obviously in 1950, what we saw is a republic coming into force, granting every citizen political right, but there was no economic as well as social right given. And I think the country started with the hope that this political right might eventually bring about social and economic equality. But the framers of the constitution had skepticism about this way of looking at a right-based perspective, simply not by enshrining in constitution, but something needs to be done more robustly, more actively. And one of the heroes of these constitutional democracy as well as India's modernity, Ambedkar, does good negotiations with another socialist figure, the first prime minister, Jawaharlal Nehru. And within these two titans in their own right, we see the nation is coming into a concrete shape. By this time, Gandhi is dead, 1948, and so the entire responsibility is being playfield of Nehru and Ambedkar, and Ambedkar mostly because of the constitutional presence. Now, having that amount of history, what we see today is, as Vrinda very rightly pointed out, almost in a fearsome a gesture, that this very constitution is a perhaps utilized for wrong reasons, or there is an attempt to change and then destroy the fundamental structure, which again is coming at the cost of denying protections and security of life, dignity, and respect to the minorities, a minority religion, but also people belonging to the oppressed caste. The Dalit segment in this fits very awkwardly because Dalits were never part of a civic life until 1950. Dalits were usually placed outside the village or the civic structure, the village or any of a congregation of what we call people. They were always placed outside, and actually there were rules. And this Kosambi scholar talks about how many feet or how many not in kilometer sense, but if we approximate the kilometers, at what distance should Dalits stay away? Then depending on, as you go up, you will have more close access to the center of the civility, center of town. And this kind of physical or spatial demarcation then again put Dalits into economic disadvantage. And because of this space, Dalits were never considered important enough to influence or to even inform any decision that has to do with this town, this village, or this locality that was going to take. And that's why Dalits were not part of it, but their labor was extremely indispensable for the regulation of rural village local economy. But the compensation to their labor was never received for the labor they provided. And that's why the idea of unpaid labor for Dalits, the former untouchables, remains a more contested issue. The idea of reparation, that the paying of their unpaid labor is constantly brought forward. Surprisingly or unsurprisingly, the Dalit political parties have not pushed for an aggressive agenda, or Dalit political leaders in various political parties, even social sphere, has not pushed an aggressive national scale agenda for reparations, but also for the reconciliation of the country that it needs to do. So India, when it got constitution, the idea of like what we had Truth and Reconciliation, Canada, Rwanda, in South Africa. We didn't have that because of extremely broken social fabric of country. That could never take place. And one of the thing is, if Gandhi would have been alive, would he do that? That remains one of the questions that have been sidelined. Now, I bring this to make a very peculiar point that uh, the class which became group of caste hoarded wealth, and there were two groups that predominantly controlled: the Brahmins and the Baniyas, the merchant castes. And because of their peculiar positioning into caste order, it remained uncontested. And because of its if less defense from the state as well as the authority, the accumulation of wealth came at the cost of exploitation of many. And the exploitation of many now become the major political base in India's constitutional democracy. It is in this light what we see is rise of Narendra Damodar Das Modi. Modi claims himself to belonging to one of the lower caste group, not the Dalit group, when in fact he's from the Baniya caste. But the twisting of tail is how constitutional democracy is utilized to grant yourself a space to become a leader of the nation through the passages of becoming first the OBC, other backward class candidate. Without that affirmation, you couldn't have won elections. However, much of the post-colonial analysis have very unsurprisingly missed a proper analysis of how caste has played its fundamental role in reshaping of the post-colonial directory of India's Yellow Book. And because of that, what we see is new tropes of researches kind of come about, and to bring to our attention how much of this theory or theorization has not taken place. One very interesting thing that happens, at least in 1954, after the Constitution comes in 1950, 1954, there is a debate in the Constitution, and Ambedkar is part of this debate. He is in the upper house, Rajya Sabha, and within this debate, there were two questions raised, and Ambedkar is fielding. One is right to property. Article 31 guaranteed. Now, 1978 amendment removed that right, but 1954 until 1978, Article 31 guaranteed right to property, and this was basically a um, a, uh, uh, a secure key for the India's dominant castes to continue becoming ruling class. By utilizing this constitutional arrangement, many of them retained the position of holding on to the private property. And much of the problems we have today is also coming out of that, even though it has been discarded at various levels. Ambedkar refuted this. He said, this is not my article. This was the article that was proposed by Congress, and they played their part. But what it did eventually is, Ambedkar was proposing right to take away land, most important land acquisition, without compensation. But he said, if you have to do a compensation, you have to follow then what Russia did, or what British Labour did after the World War, which is to guarantee all those. What British Labour government did was to pay what was the market price to major industries, banks, and so forth. In Russia, what they did, they could do that was because they offered in exchange employment, housing, social security, and all those benefits. The question was, can India do that? And because of extremely divisive nature of caste, where each caste is fighting for its own dominance from local level to the national level, it is becoming very difficult. And the idea of getting something for free or giving someone something for free wouldn't sit well within this diversity of caste. And so the proposition was made, can we alter fundamental rights? And Ambedkar very strongly defended as to why fundamental rights should not be altered the way they have been, but there are provisions of elasticity if you would like to change. This really brings us to what is being made of India's constitution right now. The central minister, skill development, a Brahmin fellow himself from Karnataka, southern India, Anand Kumar Hegde, in 2017, at a Brahmin council meeting, proposed that we are here to change the constitution. Now, that's not a new thing. Constitution has been changed. But saying from a background and a setting with a promise of removing the ideas of secularism or the ideas of socialism or the ethos of community oriented praxis was conveniently sidelined, and the idea of Hindu nation in effect means Brahmin Baniya dominated nation, the dominance of Brahmins and the dominance of the capitalist class. That's why Narendra Modi's nationalism cannot be simply framed as right wing nationalism. I personally think it's a Gujarati Baniya nationalism because of its own prevalence in finding out how specific caste interests are promoted. And today, almost in every bigger positions of power, right now, 89 percentage, let's say, of Indian media is dominated by, controlled by dominant caste. Of that, I think 62, if I'm not mistaken, is controlled by single-handedly Brahmin caste, 62 or 72. That statistics is applied to the government ministerial positions. In fact, they created a new commission to study Dalit lives, and they had all Brahmins by the government to study Dalit lives. And this was not a news for many of us who have been observing our lives being interpreted. And I think it is in this light what we see is there is a specific attention where one set of caste group, like say the Dalits, hold on to constitution, whereas the people who are oppressing don't hold on to the constitution in the same spirits. And that's my criticism of how we interpret at the look at the constitution. And that part in the book got pushback, and it got criticized bitterly. But I still stand by my position as to how we look at the same uh, uh, um, pages of guidebooks without other person not holding it in the same a sacred or offering it a sacred reverence as opposed to the person who is oppressing you. And I think that remains an uncontested, or rather remains a undiscussed topic within majority of Dalit milieu, but also within the people who are trying out there to change constitution. And that kind of came about in CANRC, which we can obviously take in question answers. But the one thing was that why it is in this macro framework, a country so fundamentally opposed to each other, which because of its own caste and class interests as well as regional differentiations come, how does it really manage to run and govern in a structure where the majority ruling party would like to then describe or reframe the nation according to its own new renaissance. And I think that remains for legal theorists as well as political theorists to think about what will be the future. Almost a soothsaying moment is happening right now as we witness arrests of progressive activists as well as people who stood in defense of fundamental structures of constitution getting arrested. And it is again here we see a certain Brahminic domination controls the Indian narrative, and that is across the board in academia, in film, and in majority of other industries of consumption. And that's why we don't see Dalit narrative coming as much forward. And I think it is in this light, I think we need to pay attention as to why caste matters and why it should always matter. Because I argue it will continue to matter unless we get rid of it. And it is not Dalits who have to get rid of it. It is the people who are utilizing caste to oppress them who need to get rid of it. And how will they do it is to make them unbearable. A person will not give up the privilege unless it becomes problematic or it becomes a cancerous to them. And I think it's some of us who need to push it aggressively so we can have a more reformed agenda for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suraj. That was uh, a talk that gives us a lot to think about, and I already have some questions lined up for you. So I'm going to give the first question to Tamara Termites. Tamara, if you could introduce yourself before you ask your question. I'd like you to ask the question instead of me asking. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Tamara Termchus. I'm a researcher, invited researcher at the center. Since you spoke about reconciliation, I was part of the group who negotiated the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Canada, uh, with respect to Aboriginal people. Um, my question is, I listened to you and I listened to the project of the Constitution as an unfinished business, because as I can see, the rights of the Dalit are not respected. But I also like to think about Fanon, and I think that's one of the subjects that you looked at. And I was reflecting when you were talking about the conclusion of the book of Fanon, and I can quote it if you want, when Fanon said at the end of his book that when we look at creating a new country or a new way to see things, we have to create a new man. And he said it in those words: Africa must start a new history and create a new man, one that is developed with a new way of thinking. So I think that I would like you to build on that, and I think that that's the spirit of your talk also. So I would love to listen to you about what is the new man in India from a Dalit perspective.
Thank you so much, Tamara, for that very enriching question. And I think Fanon remains really a guide point for many of us, especially who are critical of post-colonial nation, and more so Dalits have more investment, for example, in Fanonian thought than I think anyone else, because Fanon really, you know, puts it naked without any filters as to what we need to do. And I think and the question that you asked me to reflect upon is something I have been thinking also around for some time, especially what it means to form a new idea. Is new idea contrary to old idea? Is the newness going to be something adaptable to future, or it is just going to be stagnated in present? And I think there has been, and especially new ideas become radical because a they are not tested, and two, people are not used to it, mostly the people who are in the who are oppressors or who are ruling classes. And I think that uh, uh, that method of analysis is very much present in the Dalit sphere. Like they have tried almost every other available avenue for their freedom and liberation, because even after the freedom, the so-called freedom, the idea of unfreedom was very much part of that freedom, especially for the majority of the subaltern caste groups who were not invited to necessarily be part of this long-term project. And I think what that means is the independence movement is always looked through, and it's very interesting. If you go and talk to different caste groups, they have their own reading of independence group. If you go and talk to, let's say, a North Indian Baniya as opposed to a South Indian Kannadiga Baniya, they have a very different reading because of how this notion of country or independence was really framed. And I think if we have to describe a new citizen, I think it has to be premised on the recognition of Dalit humanity and Dalit perception of the world as something that is prerequisite. Because so far, what we did is we took the Brahminic or the dominant caste definitions and molds of what a citizen is, and taught them in history and political science classes to students. And this very much was very elite framework of describing what an ideal citizen is. And in that citizen, many of us didn't find ourselves, because we found ourselves only as victims. We found ourselves as someone who's poor, but not as someone who can participate in the dignity of an entire nation. And I think for any country, and we are talking about, it's basically in a way world renaissance, especially in the new rights-based movements and civic and social movements across the world, and so is the strengthening of fascist right-wing majoritarian viewpoint taking on another side. What we are seeing is a new nationhood that really encompasses all of this. And I think what will happen is when Dalits will promote this aggressively, they will be called anti-nationals, which they already are. They will be called the traitors of the republic, which they already are. They will be called the terrorists of the country, which they already are, because this new framework is not fitting the usual molds of how the new man, new woman, or new whoever, whatever category they would like to identify with. Because Dalits will totally change. What it will do is it will subvert. It will very much subvert. What Fanon did, Fanon subverted very much Marxian theories to fit to, and basically this is, and I think this is beyond ideological conventions. It is something that will need new language, a new way of interpreting it. We cannot really utilize the old methods which are taught to us from 100-year-old, 200-year-old, or 50-year-old history. It has to be rooted in nativism, very much in light of how the next world project should look like.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Suraj. I have another question for you from one of the audience members, and it is, what do you see to be the role of Indian diaspora communities in deconstructing the caste system within and outside India? And a related question is, what solidarity, hang on a minute, sorry. What solidarity building initiatives with other oppressed people outside of India should be prioritized?
Both are excellent questions, and I welcome them very much. In acknowledgement of the, for our much wider objectives. I think to begin with, on the diaspora question, I think it is very essential. It is almost, it should be, it is not, that the diaspora really upholds complete rights of everybody. The caste diaspora, and it is caste Hindu, caste Muslim, caste Sikh, caste Christian from India, have been a hypocritical diaspora when it comes to promulgation and upholding of rights. To give an example, a brown perspective, for example, the victim of white civilization in diaspora, let's say Canada, for example, the Indian of dominant caste background can be a victim. And so he or she will fight for rights, but will not extend the same sympathy and same recognition to other people who are fighting exact same fights for longer duration. And I think that's why what we have is a new, what we have in India, of almost a elite concept which became very prominent in the neoliberal times of 1990s in India, NRI, non-resident Indian. It was applicable only to, almost like it was not, but certain caste groups will forcefully claim that. And I think I'm working on this project with looking at the Dalit history of Canada, because it is as old as the first arrivals in the early 20th century, in the first boat and eventual kind of settlement. But the diaspora, which is the dominant caste, doesn't allow Dalit diaspora to be Dalit. And I think that is a very that is very intimidating exercise. They have to be either a Hindu, either a Sikh, and eventually over the periods of protest. Unlike Black diaspora, wherever they go, they can be Black diaspora, or they can be search specific. But for Dalits, they are not allowed to, and that's why Dalits are forced to choose a obscure identity given by the oppressor so that they become recognized and legitimized. And that's why you will see many Dalits don't affiliate in the diaspora groups. simply because they don't feel the sense of recognition. Not only Dalits, but many progressives who don't believe, whole nationalists, they don't align with this. And I think the Dalit history has been constantly in opposition with the Hindu history or the Muslim history of India, because it has constantly protested against, and what we see today, is basically when you see a celebration of a certain festival or certain ideas, historically they were anti-Dalit or anti what we saw tribal Adivasi. And so that narrative to come to the front really requires, that's why I'm saying we really require a reconciliation to really sit together and figure out how this is going to look like. And I think I really think we really need a healing commission as well as reconciliation efforts in India. We didn't have that. I mean, Vrinda, we need that, right? I mean, at least we should think about a possibility of that. I mean, people have tried, but what I'm saying is kind of a liberal approach to visit this. I will quickly address the second question. I think the solidarity with Dalit has to go across the board. Whichever oppressed group, doesn't matter what country, what struggle they are fighting, as long as they are fighting for their human rights, as long as they are fighting for the protection of political and civil liberties, as well as economic justice. I think Dalits have a huge stake in these struggles. And that's why they find allies in anywhere they can. And you will see much of that work has inaugurated 20 years ago. Now it's taking much more solid form and coming into a solid shape.
Um, thank you for that answer, Suraj. I have a question. It's from one of the audience members, and I'm going to read it out. It's, what is your position on India's preferential policies, for example, caste-based quotas, and do you think these have brought substantial change, or are they primarily symbolic and lacking in many respects?
No, I think Tara has asked a very important question. I think this requires a lengthy response, but let me just, in the sake of time, tell you, Tara. Tara, I agree with your proposition as well as suspicion as to, uh, has this brought substantial change? It has not, because uh, to be eligible to, let's say, reservation type, you really need to have, uh, you know, checked at least 5 boxes, have degree and, fit into the income criteria. You just don't get the benefit of reservation just by becoming Dalit. You really need to have those primary parameters check. People think it's like same with affirmative action for Black people, at least in America. People think that you just go and get it. No, it's much of these policies are meant to discourage Dalits to access. It's not easy. You really need to fight against the system by gathering hell lot of documents and working with bureaucracy to do that. So what I mean by that is the policies of quota, for example, in politics have not helped, because the political slavery of Dalits continue, because each political party, because of its quota, has to assimilate Dalits, and what it has done is it has gotten powerless Dalits. I mean, in fact, Dalits who are in all these political parties, highly charismatic, highly powerful leaders, very grassroots. See, the difference between Dalit politics and other politics is Dalit political leaders are coming from ground. They are not born to a family or to a caste. They really need to prove their credibility to be recognized as a political leader. So they are really grinding against a very different kind of grain. And within that, when they enter the political system, the quota-based system assimilates them, but doesn't allow them to be radical or to be openly fighting for their people, because the political party decides the mandate. However, educationally, in some extents, it has helped. In job, it has helped. But fundamental structures of redistribution of resources has not been addressed, because this is an add-on policy. This is not all policy. This is not a finality. What you need a fundamental restructuring of a economic structure. And once you are able to do that, once you are able to redistribute, once you are able to create a certain equality, then these policies can help for few generations or whatever time it needs to equalize. We live in a country right now, to even access these policies, one has to A, either betray his or her community, or two, become extremely selfish and self-centered. Because if you are not doing that, you are jeopardizing your future. If you are working in a job, you really need to suck it up, because the person who is dominating, oppressing you is your boss. What do? Just go and become a radical activist? He will fire you. Or if he can't fire you, he will punish you by writing negative reports. And many of us work in jobs, we know how it works. If you mess up with your colleagues, or there's a whole situation. But here, the Dalit condition is a condition of hostility, because the person standing as a Dalit invites respite and a sort of mockery to their talent. So I think uh, it has symbolical help, but again, it has not really helped overall. Dalit graduation is approximately 5.5%. So the reservation quota only applies to these people. What about the whole lot of people who are basically slogging on the fields as laborers, as farm workers, working in factories or begging on the streets? Or we see all that kind of dangerous informal sector jobs. Informal sector in India is 93%, and majority of them, we saw the consensus. I wrote an article on this when the crisis happened. Are Dalits and Adivasis, the tribal people, of course, because these are the people who run the ground up economy.
Thank you for that question and for the answer. I have a question from Aisha Vimuruj, doctoral student here at McGill, and she asked the question. She thanks you, though, Suraj. Can you talk a little bit more about your collaboration with Dr. Cornel West and the larger project of Dalit Black Solidarity? And she's interested in hearing more about the forms of internationalism and transnational solidarity that are emerging at the moment and what you envision for these shared struggles.
Thank you, Aisha. Let me begin with the last part of uh, trans transnational solidarity and internationalism, if I heard correct.
Yes.
So solidarity has always meant to remove any boundaries, because solidarity's purpose is to challenge the very normative divides that has been imposed. And that's why whenever we talk transnational, trans everything solidarities, it is meant to basically work in harmony with other kind of similarly placed groups. And historically, one of the first kind of alliances, if you see, at least in modern history, was basically the solidarity of the communists across the world. They developed a very strong program and today, even today, we see that it might not be as powerful as it would have been a few years ago, but a very strong sense of solidarity existed, and their purpose was always internationalism. One of the brilliance of communist response to capitalism was to challenge the internationalist order of capitalism by bringing in this. So I think it is in this light also, the newer solidarities are not necessarily fixing or agreeing to be part of either of Cold War era type of binaries. They are happy to work, or they are creating new types of politics. And we see this with LGBTIQ plus communities, with a new form of insurgents of erstwhile oppressed people who were not recognized even in the registers of their own countries as people who could have franchisee. Now these people are kind of creating new voice. They are disrupting. They are becoming problematic to much of the structures. In this light, the Dalit Black solidarity has been very historical. It has been long, and but it has only been American Black and Indian Dalit. What I wanted to do was to expand the category of Black, which it is, and extend and think about what happens in other Black dominated spaces. And one of them is, of course, Africa, but also, in Europe and other issues. And through that, what we see is even the idea of Black becomes complicated if you go to Africa, because the class and also caste divisions existing within African society brings a new picture to this. So with Professor Cornel West, what we essentially did was, uh, his hero Du Bois, my hero Ambedkar, they could never meet with each other, but they had this convergence of ideas and a vision of collective future for the world, not just for their groups. So we thought, how about we actually physically, materially, ideologically give it a new shape and an actual form for the 21st century to develop on something that is archived, that is concrete, and for the next generation. So much of the thing that I am doing right now, Aisha, is for the next generation to build upon. Because right now we are creating a certain foundation, and once this foundation is created, we hope that in future, whenever we talk about Dalit politics, we talk about other politics that exist part of it. And when we talk about Black politics, we talk about other politics. So Dalit Black kind of fits in that framework. And probably it is one of the most robust and most original form of solidarities that we can see. And I'm presenting a paper actually, at least on the literary imagination, this Thursday at Columbia, on how the Dalit and Black literary vision of the 1960s and 70s informed the Dalit public sphere. But my criticism is it never happened reciprocate. It didn't reciprocate it, because obviously Dalits were writing in Marathi and Hindi and Gujarati, which was not accessible. But so there were limitations, and so I right now wanna kind of bridge that gap, and so we are like heavily investing in translating much of the stuff. So there is more osmosis.
Um, uh, Thank you very much. We have time for one more question, please. And I'm going to take the privilege of moderating to ask you a question, my question that I've been thinking about, Suraj. And the question is this, that Du Bois, in his book, The Souls of Black Folk, he started one of his chapters by saying, how does it feel to be a problem?
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about that with regard to the issue of caste. And I thought about one of the quotes from Dr. Ambedkar, where he says that unless you solve the issue of economic inequality, how long will this carry on? Was one of the questions he asked in one of his debates. So I wanted to ask you your thoughts on those two. We put them together.
Thank you, Vrinda. I think that's a very good question for us to also maybe harmonize our, at least my thoughts that have gone in so many directions. Um, uh, I'm writing actually a book on the Dalit Black intellectual history, and Du Bois is one of the heroes alongside Fanon and Stu Biko, because I think these people really help us, and the book is very much political as well as intellectual project. What you said is also, I've been thinking about how, because Du Bois was not not a everyday scholar. He was really once in a whatever lifetime scholar, right? And so his framing of looking yourself as problem and then framing that into the concept of double consciousness, to having two kind of dual consciousness of the oppressor and being an oppressed. Ambedkar also plays this part. It's very interesting that he doesn't use the concept double consciousness, but he is playing the part of a being the leader of a nation, but also being the leader of Dalits. And where does my loyalty last? And he's like, of course it's going to last with my people, because nation is nothing but brick and whatever you imagine. Way before Benedict Anderson wrote about the imagined communities, Ambedkar had concretely placed the idea of imagination of nation in his book Pakistan or Partition of India. It is probably one of the prominent searing analysis of what nation state means. And so many of you, if you have a question on Dalit viewpoint of nation, to go to Tamara's question, I think that book helps us to at least realize some of that. And I think, Vrinda, with this idea of Ambedkar's economic equality, that has been remained outside. Even so it's almost like the economic equality was outsourced for communists to fight. which was never, and that's been one of my, critique of Dalit communities as well. It's like, when will you bring economic equality as a paradigm, as something that you need to think about as a central concept? You don't need to be a communist. You don't need to be Marx, social. You just have to be a human to realize economic necessities, and that's how you're catching hell. They do think, the Dalit community does think, because they are the victims of this, labor as well as the bourgeois sphere. But there is an overemphasis on constitution bringing this out. And I told them, like, this aspect of looking at constitution as panacea is good when you have resources. Because once you have rights, then you can work with the existing, articles and subclauses for your, this is how system works. If you have nothing, what will you do with that? Because the person who's holding position, who's holding capital, who's holding resources, is not gonna just follow it because constitution says it has to be followed with certain action. And I think this agenda of economism, unfortunately, was hijacked by the communists. And again, this communists of India were dominant. Most of them were Brahmin caste communists or dominant caste communists. Many, in fact, almost all leaders, Central Party, are Brahmins even now. So what we see is the hijacking of economic agenda, taking Dalits away from Ambedkar's promise of economic justice. And his Constitution Assembly speech of 26 January, when Constitution was handed, is basically repeating this. He's saying, oh, yes, we have Constitution, but folks, you all have to remember, unless there is economic equality, unless there is social equality, this is just nothing. And he, in fact, said he will burn the Constitution when they pissed him off in 1953. And of course, later he said, why I said that. So what you see is the state trying to buy into Dalit emotion towards the Constitution of Ambedkar's vision. While Ambedkar also wrote State and Minorities, a radical socialist redistribution, almost like some manifesto of liberation and redistribution of resources. That was the Constitution he proposed before getting into Constitution Assembly. And I think I tell many people, if you want to celebrate Ambedkar's Constitution, do that, but alongside also celebrate what he wrote or envisioned as his own Constitution. Of course, when he went into Constitution Assembly, there were a lot of difficulties. So through this, what I mean to say, Vrinda, is that the economic program, whenever we will talk or we describe, and I appeal to everybody in this audience and who will listen eventually, is Dalits' investment in nation state or the human state is for economic independence. So let it not be caricatured as non-Dalit or a Dalit or taken away from Dalit's agency and it is an ideological struggle. No, it's a human struggle. And so whenever we'll describe, this has always been the case, but the recognition was not given. People, when they were fighting in Telangana, the peasants or the labor or the farm workers, these people were fighting for economic justice. But of course, they were fighting against certain ideology. But I always tell them, if there were no communists, Dalits would still fight because they still fight today. So what we need is, we need to cut some slack on Dalits as their autonomous being and let them really follow. There will be a problem, what Du Bois said. And it is good for them to be a problem because they are not going to provide solutions. The solutions are going to come from other side. Dalits are always going to fight. But if Dalits come in position, then they will be the solution makers. And so I think Dalit as a problem is very important reminder for the comfortable ruling class of India who wants to envision a liberal future without willing to give up their privileges and accounting to their atrocities that commit every day. Last 10 years, 500,000 serious crimes were committed against Dalits. And this is, by the way, National Crime Record Bureau data. India Spend website that is out of, I think, Bangalore, who does data crunching, they came out with these figures. So if it's a state number, we really see what I call slow genocide happening under our eyes. And every Dalit death that happens, and we have record that every week 13 Dalits are murdered, physically murdered. So if you account to that, it is adding to the numbers of genocide that this community is undergoing. But we have not given them, because we have not given them the right to be a victim of genocide, but we have given them right to be a victim of some caste or some group. I think we need to make them a broader consensus. So I think that question is important, and I think it has allowed me to also think about Dalit as a problematic category. I thank you for that.
Thank you very much for that brilliant answer, Suraj. I'm going to hand the floor over now. I'm afraid we're out of time for questions, and I'm going to hand the floor over now to Professor Priya Gupta for the vote of thanks. Priya.
Thank you very much, Dr. Suraj Yende, for coming virtually speaking with us at McGill. It's snowing outside, and I wish that you were here in person so that we could have all gotten a coffee right now. That would have been very nice. I think that went very quickly. We probably could have spoken for another few hours at least, but that's with the best talks and with the best encounters that it leaves open conversations for another day. So thank you very much again for coming and for being our guest today. And we hope that we get to meet you again soon.
I thank you all, and I'm enriched. I had few points written down, but maybe there is an occasion for another, time and another space to do. Thank you so much, you all, and thank you so much, Vrinda. As usual, much love to you and your work.
Okay, and it's just wonderful. Thank you for the audience for participating and for your thoughtful questions. And thank you again, Dr. Yende, and we look forward to reading more of your books and hearing more about your work in the future.
Thank you so much.
All the best.